Hello, everybody, and welcome to the reality show. I'm Mark Pellegrino. I'm going to be your host today. I have some great co-hosts with me, Michael Kaufman, and our old friends, Marco and Richard, great objectivists who always have thoughtful responses to pretty much every topic that I've ever been a participant in. Today, we're going to talk about an interview that Piers Morgan had with the Israeli ambassador to the UK. It's Tzipi Hotovely. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that name right. I might have screwed that up badly. Well, it seems that now, in Pierce's ever modulating perspective of what's going on in the war in Israel, which seems to undulate from time to time. He's now coming down on the side of Israel is engaged in a genocide. Its actual purpose is to cleanse the Gaza Strip of all Palestinians, and now Israel is being called under fire because, of course, they want to prevent all this aid going into Gaza, which is basically stolen by Hamas and used for military purposes. I, of course, take umbrage with the entire concept that Israel should give aid to the Palestinians at all. I think it's absolutely absurd that you're at war with a population, a toxic culture that wants you dead and makes no bones about it, and yet you have to at once attempt to dislodge the enemy and at the same time feed, clothe, and house them. And that's what makes you a decent person. To me, the world is morally bankrupt. Guys, I only saw a few minutes of the interview between Piers and Sippy, but it was terrifyingly stupid, and it made me wonder how it is a man could become a high. I mean, he was the editor of a journal out there in the UK, and now he's a fairly large media presence in the world who probably influences the way people think. How is it that a person can get to such a high position in the world and be so absolutely stupid? But let's talk about what exactly the problem was between the two of them in the interview. Michael, why don't you start off? If you saw the whole interview, I don't know, you can probably inform me, but certainly Piers took it in a direction that was quite hostile to the interest of Israel.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Israel, and this is not just Tzipi, and she did, as best as she could. I mean, he really went up against her and didn't let her, you're actively killing children. And the notion is that basically, if you do the quick thought experiment, Pierce would say that if a terrorist is holding a machine gun on you with one hand and a child on the other, you're not allowed to shoot that terrorist because there's a kid there. Now, what I find unfortunate, I've said it on the show before, is it is shocking to me how Israel cannot enunciate that simple case. They just can't. They are unable to put it into words that when terrorists put children between them and bullets and then fire at you, you have every legal right in the entire world. In the U.S., we have, as I've said, the felony murder rule. If you commit a bank robbery and an innocent person is killed by the police during the commission of the robbery, it is the robber who goes to jail for that death, not the policeman who shot the innocent civilian. And the reason
Well,
is if the robber hadn't committed the crime, the civilian would. So that's he just went after her, and unfortunately, she wasn't really able to get in any words, and she can't enunciate the simple fact that every single child death in the Gaza Strip is because of October 7th and the Palestinians, and she couldn't, at least the part I was watched before I really got sick of listening, she couldn't even said this continues and this will continue until every single hostage is returned and the Hamas, which has a charter, as you said, Mark, to annihilate Israel, is decimated.
yeah, now it seems to me that I see this argument all the time on social media. I certainly see people making the argument that the responsibility for the casualties, for every casualty, both on Israel's side and on the Palestinian side, is the fault of Hamas and the Palestinian acolytes of Hamas. And it seems to me that the diplomats are trying to walk a fine line where they're trying to at once accept altruist premises that they should somehow sacrifice themselves to these folks that there are supposed to be their moral equals. And at the same time, they're trying to hustle in a little self-interest, which, as we've seen in the disintegration of the Republican Party in America over the last several decades, does not work. When you when you break away from the integrity of a moral principle and you start practicing what Ayn Rand would call a pragmatism, when you throw away principles and you start trying to marry these contradictions, it's always the bad that wins. Marco and Richard, what do you think about that?
Yeah, for sure, and that's the difference you see in this whole interview. When we show some clips in a minute, you'll see it for yourself. I think the problem with Piers Morgan is that he always waits till a mob forms and then pretends to lead it. He's somebody who his interviewing style is it's not interviewing, it's interrupting. It's performance anger. It's the kind of the yelling your virtue while sitting on the back of a bandwagon and claiming you're brave for doing so. That's his style of approach. And what he tries to do throughout this interview is exactly that. It's to nail down to such a delimited extent as to make it impossible for anybody to answer. So he'll ask a question and he'll restrict the manner in which it's answered so that the interviewee is supposed to start their answer with a set phrase. And as soon as they do accept that premise of starting that answer with a set phrase, he's got you. Because then he's got you saying the phrase that he wanted you to say, which completely destroys the argument that you were trying to make and the argument that is based on reality, which is the fact that obviously you can't supply the enemy with aid and you can't give in to the enemy in the way that is being demanded and then claim that diplomacy will stop future hostage taking when it clearly won't.
And what's particularly depressing is that in this interview, specifically, Piers Morgan shows that he hasn't got any moral standing at all. You would expect by now, after 600 days of after October, over 600 days after October the 7th, when he's interviewed and heard voices from both sides a number of times, you would expect him to have a clear picture of what's going on. You would expect at least to have some doubts about how innocent are these Palestinians. But all he does in this interview, again, over 600 days after October 7th, is trying to get the ambassador to the UK, the Israeli ambassador, to actually admit that Israelis kill children. I mean, how old is the tropism? He keeps banging on her about giving the number of many people they're killing, effectively expecting her to accept his premise that Israel is killing children. We know understanding that a killing has to show intention to kill. That's why she keeps coming back to him saying, we do not kill children, we kill terrorists. And of course, ignoring the fact, as Mark pointed out, that these Palestinians defend themselves by hiding in civilian compounds, in hospital, in schools. And of course, if you go after the terrorists, there's going to be a collateral damage. There's going to be civilians who dies, but those civilians have been put in danger in the line of fire by the very terrorists which are targeted by Israel. And this moral inversion has been going on now for nearly 3 years, that Israel is supposed to be the bad guy. Well, hang on a second. They're defending themselves after the attack of October the 7th. They've been under attack by these Islamic monsters for the last 80 years, since the very formation of the State of Israel. And why? Again, Mark pointed out, and Michael mentioned that the foundation, the raison d'etre of Hamas is to get rid of the Jews.
So one of the things that gets me is that all of us as objectivists would agree that the purpose of the government is to protect its citizens. Now, Hamas has come straight out and said they don't believe that the purpose of Hamas, the government currently in power in Gaza, is to protect the Palestinian citizens. They put that responsibility squarely in the lap of the United Nations. This should tell you lots. And if that doesn't tell you enough, they have a known policy. You could go on multiple sites on YouTube and find Hamas leaders talking about their actual policy of using civilians as human shields. Their goal is to demoralize the Israeli people and to turn the world population morally against Israel. And they do that by praying and hoping that as many civilian casualties as possible die. Now, because Israel is acquiescing to the ethics of altruism, they are putting their soldiers at unnecessary risk. In my view, they should have bombed the place into oblivion and sent not one soldier into that space until the entire infrastructure was completely destroyed and disrupted. If they did send anybody in who survived drone and remote attacks, then it should have been only to mop up and count the dead. That's it. But as it is, the Israeli soldiers are putting themselves at great risk, and they're putting their economy at great risk. Since every person is a reservist, the longer this conflagration goes on, the more economically disrupted the Israeli economy becomes, because all of their productive people and all of their productive capacity is being drained to go to this war. So altruism and collectivism is truly, truly disturbing and disrupting the capacity of the Israeli people to win this war. They've got to give it up right now if they want to win, and winning is possible. Did you want to say something, Michael? You look like you're ready to you're chomping at the bit before we get this first
Yeah,
clip
look,
up.
I think one of the reasons, I mean, clearly our eyes are telling us, and we should all believe it, there is a rift between Washington and Israel. And I believe that started, most of the people that I talk to here, and I'm right now in Tel Aviv, that I talk to here believe it started when when Hamas blew up yet another ceasefire attempt. And Trump was trumping around saying, you know, we're going to get this done, and then blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, the 11th hour, Hamas laughed at it again. And then he told Netanyahu to rain hell upon them. And Netanyahu did nothing. It didn't change the war metric at all. He did about 6 weeks later, but I believe the rift came when Netanyahu didn't do anything. Because we all believed, and we could at least excuse, to your point, Mark, why didn't Israel go and bomb the crap out of them? Because Biden, or whoever was manipulating Biden's, you know, the puppet master, held him back. And clearly Biden held him back. But Trump told him, go and just rain hell on them, the way that the U.S. did to the Houthis. Or at least did a little bit of hell to the Houthis. At least it temporarily stopped the Houthis. So Netanyahu did nothing. The war did not change at all until very recently. And even now, as you say, instead of being just bombing runs and just annihilate them and be done with it, they're sending in more and more soldiers, another dead today. You know, it's ridiculous. But that's the problem in Israel, that I don't even think it's, frankly, at this point, I don't think most of us here believe there's much altruism left. We think this is a political maneuver by Netanyahu to prolong everything. Trump is fed up with it. You can like Trump or not like him, but there's definitely a rift. And I think there is no question. My kid's in the reserve. He was just called up to Gaza. Now, again, he was 6 months in Syria and Lebanon. To your point, Mark, it's absolutely true. There's hundreds of thousands of these kids being called up, pulled out of work, and so on.
Oh, that's a tragedy if Netanyahu is doing this to keep himself in power and avoid
I think
corruption
so.
charges.
No other rational explanation has been put forward yet.
Well, a war that should probably have taken 2 months is now going into
Exactly.
its third year. It's pretty scary that this is the case.
Yeah.
But the clip, one of the other problems I think comes from having a diverse society. Even though, as much as we like diversity in society, diversity of opinion, it enables the bad guys like Piers Morgan, to get people who are from Israel, who are against what's going on in Israel, because there's of course a plurality. There's pluralism there. There's cultural pluralism, so people have all kinds of different opinions, and they then point out these Israelis as representative of some form of truth, not just their own opinions, but of a wider metaphysical truth about the status of this war. And the clip that we're about to see is a past prime minister says something like, "See, even pro-Israelis are turning on Israel," and this seems like it's fodder for Piers Morgan. So, Daniel, if you could roll this clip real fast, let's check it out.
Mayor also said, and I quote, "The government of Israel is currently waging a war without purpose, without goals or clear planning, and with no chances of success." Meanwhile, Ehud Barak, another former prime minister and former IDF chief of staff, says the war is now purely for Netanyahu's self-preservation. Yair Golan, an opposition voice and a former army deputy chief of staff, said Israel is, quotes, killing babies as a pastime, close quotes, and risks becoming a pariah state. These aren't radical Islamists or raging anti-Semites, but patriotic Israelis who think their country is losing the plot. Today, Israel announced that they've eliminated Hamas's chief in Gaza, Mohammed Sinwar, the younger brother of Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind behind the deadly attacks on October the 7th. That was seen as a huge win by Israel as they looked to justify the continued fighting. But how many innocent Palestinians are losing their lives as a consequence? Overnight, we saw more shocking scenes in Gaza as thousands of Palestinians overran an aid site run by a US and Israeli-backed group with the intention of taking control of food distribution away from the UN. Many experts believe that swathes of Gaza face imminent famine caused by an 11-week Israeli blockade, which is only now beginning to ease.
I mean, I don't even know where to begin with stuff like this because, look, it may be true that that Netanyahu is prolonging the war to keep his political career intact, but he also seems to be between a rock and a hard place. There is nothing the Israelis can do that will please the world community, and there's nothing the Israelis could do other than capitulate to Hamas's demands that would please people like Piers Morgan, who just want the killing to stop. They can't seem to connect the dots that the killing would stop instantly if the hostages were returned and Hamas abdicated power. What do you do in a case like this, Michael? I'll get to you second because I'm sure you're directly on the pulse of it. But Marco and Richard, what do you do in a case like this? I mean, clearly Netanyahu's a bit of a power luster. He's not somebody that I would get behind necessarily. But he seems to be in a political dilemma right now, and a moral dilemma right now, because anything he does will be a loss.
Well, yeah, the issue here, well, first of all, Piers Morgan doesn't want killing to be stopped. He just wants a temporary reprieve because if Netanyahu and the state of Israel goes along to what Piers Morgan is suggesting, i.e. stop Piers Morgan and the rest of the world is suggesting stop the conflict right now, it means that in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, you're going to have an October the 7th event or even bigger than that. So you will never stop the killing of Israeli by the Palestinians. That's it's a given. It happened with the return of Gaza to the Palestinians. It happened every time there is a pause in hostilities. The peace is always broken by the Palestinian attacking Israel again, and so the presence of people in Israel itself who are criticizing the war against Gaza are just undermining the position of the government itself. And I don't particularly care for Netanyahu as such. I don't really care for him. But the point that Israelis cannot live a life where they are constantly under the threat of missiles, rockets, and ramming and terrorist attack within their own state. And the fact that they tend to utilize the freedom that they can enjoy in Israel itself, all these critics, by criticizing their own side and never actually denouncing and pointing out that the tyrants on the other side are the people who are causing the suffering of the Palestinians in the first place, because the Arab population living in Israel are free to choose what's best for their own lives. Without being stopped from, believing in their gods, ghosts, and whatever they want to do. So in the first place, we should recognize that you cannot exploit the freedom that you enjoy because people are fighting for it and use it in order to usher in another bout of Middle Ages where we just all, flagellate ourselves and live under some kind of theocracy or dictatorship.
I think the problem here is he's quoting a bunch of Netanyahu's political rivals in the first place and previous prime ministers who can always have claimed to have dealt with things differently or done things better or whatever. And he's also reflecting the fact that this war has lasted for a long time. And it's lasted for a long time because of the submission to that altruism, to those limitations, to those restrictions imposed by outside and some within, who wish it to be fought with kid gloves, who wish it to be fought in a TV-friendly way, which simply rounds up terrorists and leads them off and puts them in prison, and doesn't recognise the reality of it. But you hear within Piers' own statements there what is actually true, because he seems annoyed that Mohammed Sinwar has been annihilated by Israel. That's seen as a huge win for Israel. That is a huge win for Israel. That's a huge win for humanity. That is justice in action. The fact that he says as a consequence, Palestinian people are, and children or whatever are dying. Well, that is a consequence of the terrorism of Hamas, and if they surrender, that would cease to be the case. Clearly, underneath all of this is the fact that whilst people claim that there's a principle of justice, of self-defense, they also claim in the next breath that they're running out of patience with their own principle. Now, you don't run out of patience with a principle. You either hold a principle or you don't, and you either act on it or it's, you show the courage of your convictions, or you're not holding that principle properly. And here, that people are claiming it's a principle, but then it's drifting quickly into pragmatism, quickly into, well, we'll surrender that principle now because the short-termism demands that we abandon it and adopt a new one and hold that very strongly and very firmly. But of course, that just exposes, the fact you didn't hold the first one in the first place.
What do you say to all this, Michael? You're right in the thick of it.
Well, I think you're, this political rival, and frankly, we all think he's a completely invertebrate type of person. It's easy to criticize when you're sitting on the sideline. The fact is, the center left in Israel, and frankly, the left in Israel is mostly center by any American standard. They're certainly not woke here. Definitely is unable to get any kind of real leadership. And they can certainly criticize Netanyahu, but you'll notice there's no suggestion of a better solution by this astute politician who can't stand Netanyahu and so on. But and I'm not a fan of Netanyahu at all. I don't trust him. I think it's I'm actually very upset that my kid is going to go back to Gaza. And he's insisting on it because he's not fighting for Netanyahu, as he says he's fighting for Israel. But there are two very clear goals in the war. And one is to get the hostages back. And the other one is to eradicate, and I mean eradicate, Hamas. And that might include shipping the leaders of Hamas, because many of the terrorists will be killed, of course. But as is always the case with these people, many of whom are multimillionaires and billionaires, as we saw, will be shipped off to Qatar or some other lovely place in the world to go live the rest of their life and foment more anti-Western and anti-Israeli motion. But there are two obvious goals for this war. We can have lots of discussion, and I think we all on this show agree that the war was never fought with principles, in the sense that it was always kind of one hand behind your back. It's absurd. I strongly believe, because I think we're 600 days into this, and it is very clear that fighting a war with one hand behind your back, as Obama did against ISIS, as America did in Vietnam, as America did even in Korea. The last time we fought a war, we've said this before, is World War II. We didn't worry about feeding the Germans. We certainly didn't send ships to Japan to feed the Japanese. We put up a naval blockade on Japan, and then we dropped not one, but two atomic bombs on them, because one wasn't enough to convince them to surrender. And clearly, Hamas is not going to surrender. And for some reason, that's Israel's fault. And you've got Steve Witkoff in there negotiating basically on behalf of Hamas to keep some hostages so we can prolong this thing forever. And I think he's possibly as stupid as Blinken, but maybe not. But I think what Israel should have done, and the only thing that could have worked, was to do what Mark said at the beginning, which was to finish the war in 2 months. The world isn't going to like anything you do. They're going to blame you for everything. 2 minutes after October 7th happened, The world was already against Israel. And instead of saying F you to the world, we need to defend our people, we need to do what every legitimate government would do, we decided to fight the war in a half-assed, targeted way by going into the north, being shocked that the terrorists moved to the middle, going into the middle, being shocked that they moved north and south, and then finally going into the south, even though Kamala Harris, remember, she looked at a map, if you remember one of her amazing comments, and finally went into Khan Yunis and finally did something down there. But by then they had all moved back to the center in the north. So now they're finally going in big time. They're not bombing big time. And it is ridiculous. This is what happens, at least my read of history, when countries fight wars half-assed, not to win. This is exactly what happened. They end up with stagnation. We end up with dead kids on our side. We end up with lots of dead people on their side. And frankly, I don't care because, yes, it's like the playground. They started it. We got to end it. But I want everyone to remember, Gazans elected Hamas. That's their government. In a normal situation, in a normal world, when you elect a government, you benefit from the good things they do and you suffer for the bad things. You don't like your government? Elect somebody else. And don't blame Israel because your choices are basically one level of evil versus another level of evil between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. But that's the only solution I think that any of us could agree on is you fight a war to win. And you annihilate your enemy, especially an enemy that is proud to say that they want to annihilate you.
Yeah, let's talk about a few things. First of all, the accusations that everybody hears today of ethnic cleansing and genocide, these were not just made up today. These accusations have been going on as blood libels for decades upon decades upon decades. Since the very beginning, these have been the claims of the quote unquote Palestinian Arabs and the people who support them. This is not new, and this won't go away. No matter how Israel fights the war, they are going to be subject to the same claims that they've been subject to for the past 75 years. We have to talk a little bit about what war is, because people talk about war crimes and Israel is committing war crimes. The concept of war crimes seems almost absurd to me, and I'll tell you why. War is the crime. Initiating the war is the crime. Um, as we objectivists understand, the initiation of force is the only way you can really violate people's rights. So the initiation of force is a criminal act in and of itself. You're violating the rights of another human being. Now, a war is an emergency situation, right? It's something under which no human being could live for long under those kinds of conditions. And so the object should be to finish it as quickly as possible. Now, the defenders have only one moral responsibility, and that's to end the threat permanently. That's it. The ancillary to that is the protection and defense of their people, which is what the government is supposed to do. A proportional response from Israel to Palestine or to the Palestinians in Gaza is the response that one, decimates Hamas, completely eliminates it, and gets the hostages returned, and it eliminates that Islamic jihadist wing of government from power entirely. That's the proportionate response. How many people that takes out is entirely up to the Palestinian people and Hamas, not Israel. Israel just has to react and change the political situation over there and get their people back. I wanted to say something about what you said, Michael, about Trump. Trump has turned out to be a paper tiger. He's to me when I first heard him threaten. Here's what I first heard. I could be getting the message wrong, but he wanted all the hostages back by Saturday. And if they didn't get back by Saturday, there was going to be hell to pay. Now, that hell, in my mind, didn't imply just the Israelis going in there and doing something, but there was going to be some American support behind this hell, and they were going to flatten Gaza until Gaza finally said, "I give up." Folks, that's what surrender means. Surrender means I'm no longer going to use force. I'm no longer going to violate rights. I'm going to embrace civil society now. I want to be a legitimate state. I want to embrace human life and rationality again. That's what surrendering means. Some ceasefire where we enable this irrationality, this fanatical society to remain as it is, to kill people down the road, that is not a viable solution. But Trump promised there was to be hell to pay. And what did he do then? He backed off and gave it all to Netanyahu, gave it all to the Israelis. Do what you need to do, knowing damn well without American support, there was going to be a vitriolic response around the world to anything that Israel did. So as far as I'm concerned, that was an abandonment. And then when he went after the Houthis, he said he was going to end them. I don't consider surgical strikes against these savages ending the Houthis. Ending the Houthis means ending the Houthis as a threat to all the commercial shipping that's going on in the Red Sea and to all those those missiles that are being shot at you, Michael, at Tel Aviv by these savages, these toothless sheep herding savages, which is what they are. And they need to be taken out because they're religious fanatics and they're a threat to the entire world. Before I get to your opinions, Marco and Richard, I just want to acknowledge the super chats from Bronx Guy, 99 cents. Thank you for that. Apollo Zeus, £5. Thank you for that. Mary, £5 with $5 with a comment. I'm exploring the five laws of stupidity to explain the wave of social ballast sweeping towards collectivism. Good. If you find any solutions other than objectivism, let me know. But I think objectivism is the antidote to the epidemic of stupid going around. Jonathan Honig, thank you. Jonathan Honig, thank you very much for 4.99 and another 99 cents. Yes, okay. So I was instructed by Daniel to read those. I just did that intuitively. I didn't do it with his instruction. But Marco and Richard, do you have anything to add to these concepts before we go to the next clip?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that you're talking about quickly ending the war by being thorough and firm from the beginning, and of course taking out the leadership. And I think the way that people describe this and the way people look at this is wrong, because that's why at the end of each occasion, when Israel takes out one of the terrorists, one of the named terrorists that we've all seen their faces of, know their names too. The argument is enough now. You've got that guy. Enough now. We've taken him out. Therefore, we've taken. Essentially, the implication is we've taken the ideology out, as if the ideology is led by that leadership, that one person or that military commander imposing it upon everybody else. When it isn't the way it works at all. There are many of them, and it works right down to the base. In any other country, you'd call it like grassroots support, wouldn't you? And that's what it has. It has grassroots support for the ideology of killing Jews right down to the ground, right down to the base. And that is why the distinction between Hamas and the Palestinian people is such a fake distinction. And that's why you need to defeat both. And you need to ensure that both are going to surrender and give up that ideology and declare, we relinquish it, we accept we're defeated, and here are the hostages to prove it. And that is why, of course, so many of the ordinary Palestinians participated in the taking and holding of hostages, in the first place and throughout this whole 600 days.
And might I say, in the rape, mayhem, murder, and looting of the kibbutzes down south there. So they were open and happy participants. There's tons of video evidence to this. You don't have to take my word for it. It's all over the place. Marco, what do you think about this?
Well, what we said, what you guys have said so far, it's actually been acknowledged by Piers Morgan when he asked the question, when he talks about asking a question, when he says, "Why is this ferocious war carrying on?" or something? Why are you waging this ferocious war? Effectively acknowledging the fact that the other side, the side who started this ferocious war, are not giving up. They're still fighting. They're still fighting despite knowing that their civilians are effectively put in danger, their children are put in danger, but they whinge about it rather than do something about it. And the something about it should be remove the Hamas leadership and surrender. Lay down your weapons, lay down your stupid, hateful ideology, and return the hostages which are still held by the very people who are screaming famine and we're hungry and we're tired of war. Well, give up, give in, surrender if you're really tired of war.
Yeah, talk about this soft bigotry of low expectations. The world infantilizes the Palestinian people and makes them totally not responsible for anything that happens to them. Well, I got news for you, Palestinian people. If any of you folks are listening, you are responsible for what's going on, and you better take responsibility for it. Here's a good way to do it. Here's a good way to start doing it. Rebel. rebel against Hamas, join hands with your Israeli brothers and sisters, and start fighting these demons, for lack of a better word. And then maybe we'll start believing that you want an end to this conflict. Until you start doing that, I'm sorry, you don't have my sympathies. We need to end the toxicity in that region. Ryan Ward gives us $5.49 Canadian. Thank you, Ryan, for your support of the show. We're going to show another clip here. Guys, try not to let this clip lower your IQ, because it's possible. It's possible that exposure to Piers Morgan can have a deleterious effect on your IQ. All right, but we'll try to get through it. All right, let's go.
The problem is that whilst you're saying all this and trying to justify it, you've got people like Smodrich coming out and making it absolutely crystal clear what the real plan is, which is to completely clean out Gaza of all the Palestinians and get them into, quotes, a third country. That is a form of genocide. It is the deliberate targeting of people based on ethnicity and displacing them from their homes and killing a lot of them in the process. I don't know what else you would call it. I've resisted using the word genocide about this, but when I watched what Mr. Smodrich was saying and studied the exact words that he said, it is very hard to reach any other conclusion than that he is waging a strategy of genocide and would like to cleanse, as he put it, the whole Gaza Strip of all the Palestinians. So you can try and dress up that blockade, which is what it was for 3 months, where we saw the starving children you say you're concerned about, but you've got Smodrich there actually laying bare the real plan, which is to get all the Palestinians out of Gaza. And that is a form of genocide, isn't it? What else do you call it?
Shoot me now. That was particularly difficult to listen to. I will reserve comment until after you guys give your perspective of that. Michael, do you want to start?
Well, I mean, we can start with a couple of things. One, genocide is actual killing people, not displacing them. Number two, it's happening all over the world all the time and has since the beginning of history, that warring factions have led to displacement of people. It's going on in a lot of places, a lot worse than that. But I think the thing that is so remarkable about this, and it gets a little bit to the infantilization, but basically the entire left movement these days is to infantilize anyone who's a total disaster, a failure, a criminal, or anything, because none of that's their fault. It's all because of us who are the successful oppressors. And Israel, of course, fits into that. But let's go and look at the charter for Hamas, which is a single country solution, not a two-state solution. The charter for Hamas is the river to the sea. There will be no more Jews anywhere near us. In fact, they want to rid the entire world of Jews, but they'll start with Israel. If that's not a form of genocide, which is exactly where they actually want to commit genocide, they want to finish, and they've said this proudly, they want to finish what Hitler started. They're very disappointed that he didn't succeed, he and his henchmen, and they want to continue it. That's real genocide. Never mind all the other places in the world that genocide is occurring, which actually is genocide. Even if it were true, and Smotrich is a disaster, and we can hate him and we can make fun of him, but the point is that displacing people who want to murder you is sort of like the same thing as putting criminals into jail. We don't want them next to us because they have taken an oath to annihilate us at any chance they have. And anybody with a brain or who believes in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it's kind of hard to pursue happiness if you're dead, right? Anybody who believes in that understands that if people want to annihilate you, you need to get rid of them, period. And if getting rid of them means killing them after they have come to kill you, and they have done that multiple times, not just October 7th, you do that. But you can also put them on buses and move them or whatever. So what is amazing, again, Israel, since the beginning of the war, will start in the middle of a presupposition or a statement. They sort of pick up the argument from the middle instead of saying, wait a minute, you want to talk about genocide? Let's pull up the Hamas charter, because that's what this started. And Hamas didn't just have words. They acted on it. And then show a few pictures of all the women being raped and the kids, the Israeli kids being beheaded and so on. And then that's that's what started this, and it's very important what started. Never mind all the bus bombings and the intifadas and all of the missiles coming from Gaza the entire time for the last 2 decades, 3 decades, since Israel left Gaza in 2006.
Well,
It
you
is
guys,
remarkable how Israel has the inability to respond in a principled way foundationally. They always get into the yeah, but, and that's the problem.
no, Michael, you Israelis are just supposed to take a certain level of daily violence.
That's right.
You're
A few
supposed to
dead
tolerate.
Israelis here and there.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you're supposed to tolerate that, even though no other people on the planet
Yeah.
planet would. Marco and Richard, what do you say to this IQ killing commentary on the part of Piers Morgan?
I mean, the script is truly diabolical. That shows how evil and how low this man can get. First of all, we didn't see starving children because there weren't starving children. Throughout this last 600 days, Israel has been allowing food into Gaza, and we've seen a number of times the markets with food in it and all this kind of stuff. So this is a bare lie. We saw dying children on October the 7th when the Palestinians were actually broadcasting live on social media what they were doing to the Israelis. We've seen that. And if you're really worried about the children, what about the Bibas children? Nobody seems to give a crap about the fact those two kids have been murdered by those monsters. And so we worry about the children that are killed by their own parents and guardians because they are put in harm's way as a shield against the defense of Israel. And then, I mean, a form of genocide, it's like somebody has been slightly killed. This is ridiculous. I mean, genocide is a specific, precise accusation which has a specific range and criteria in order to be identified. And displacing, as Michael said, displacing people, it doesn't even appear in the 5 criteria. And frankly, I'm not a fan of clearing the Gazans from Gaza. I think they should stay there, rebuild everything that they caused the destruction of, fill the tunnels, and rebuild Gaza to a Monaco level. They should be de-radicalized and not allowed to leave at all. In the same way, you do not allow a cancer to spread and metastasize across the globe. And frankly, personally, I would get rid of the Palestinians, every single one of them, in the sense that not physically because they're not an ethnicity, but as the political party which pitched itself against the existence of a Jewish state and Jewish people in the Middle East.
I think,
So you,
sorry,
go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
What I know out of this clip is the fact that it's Piers Morgan who's claiming some special insight into what the real plan is. And what was he trying to do there? He's trying to distract from the things which are rather difficult to justify, such as why people hold hostages and why they were taken in the first place. So I'd rather not talk about that. I'd rather talk about what I claim is the real plan instead of the attempt to rescue them, for example. The only thing that's trying to be displaced here is your attention from the facts, and that's clearly what he's doing. And one of the things I notice is that if you look at any period of time, Israel is always described as the enemy. And if you look at the period from like 2005, from the disengagement of Gaza up to October the 7th, we were told it was an open air prison, weren't we? We were told how terrible the conditions were. And yet now we're told about all of the things that can no longer supposedly take place that were taking place during that period when it was an open air prison, including things that like IVF programs, for example, which apparently the other day, a particular IVF part was struck in the course of trying to go after terrorists. Now, the fact there was an IVF program does it, it's all the kind of thing that suggests that life wasn't as god awful as you're making out during that period. But you chose to make it god awful since, because of your actions on October the 7th. And therefore, what's happening now is your just desserts.
Well, they're certainly not worried about consistency. I remember the open air prison accusation coming alongside uh, p- uh, drone footage of how beautiful Gaza used to be. And for some reason, nobody would point out, except for me, I wouldn't see anybody pointing out the contradiction. It's either an open air prison or it's a paradise. Which one is it? It can't be both simultaneously, folks. But it's conveniently whatever it is that they want to influence public opinion. You're either an open air prison, and so that justifies our violence towards you, or look at the beautiful stuff that you've destroyed, which also justifies our violence towards you. Jonathan Honing, thank you for another 99 cents. Malachi O'Brien for your pound. We thank you, appreciate you for your support. Now, let's just say, for example, that the overall goal was, as Trump sort of broached, the movement of the Palestinian people out of Gaza and into, I don't know, one of the 22 other states where they, have a similar culture, similar language, and would likely have no issues because there's no Jews there to get under their skin just by existing. I mean, you have issues with that, Marco. You said you'd rather have them stay there, be forced to stay there and rebuild. I don't see that as possible unless the ideology is defeated. And the only way the ideology can be defeated is by a complete and total degradation of the not only Hamas but the Palestinian people who agree with Hamas. And that we do not have the stomach to do. We had the stomach to do it in Japan. Japan saw in no uncertain terms that their
Yeah.
ideology of imperialism and chauvinism was going to lead to absolute and total destruction. The Nazi Germany's through the bombings of Dresden and Berlin, by taking the war to their doorsteps, understood that Nazism had no place in the world and it would only lead to death and destruction. General Tecumseh Sherman understood that in his war with the South. He understood that the plantation owners were supporting the war. Of course, the people who generally didn't own slaves were the ones fighting the war. And the way to stop the war was to take the war to the plantation owners' doorsteps, burn their crops, burn their property, and make them feel the pinch of their ideology. When he did that in his terrible march through Georgia to the sea, the war stopped. That's how you defeat an ideology. Now, we hear all the time you can't defeat an ideology. Yeah, so what? There's going to be a few fringe people that still believe in this Islamicist bullshit, this maniacal crap, but they will understand that to exercise their belief will lead to certain destruction. And you can't do that when you are forced to simultaneously materially support, and feed the population that wants you dead. It's absolutely irrational. It's like we're living in the land of bizarro. Okay, look, before we go on, we have to squeeze in one more clip. Daniel's giving me the warning, so we're going to squeeze in one more clip. Please do whatever you can do to protect your IQs. They are at serious risk, probably. I haven't seen this clip yet, but they are at serious risk for losing at least a half a point. Okay, no matter how strong you are. Go ahead.
But you don't know how many children you've killed in the process.
I have
Why
an
don't you
answer
know
because
that?
we targeted those terrorists and we never targeted any civilians. That's the answer, and this
But
is why
you know that
we
you know
have the
many
numbers.
thousands of civilians, but you know many thousands of civilians have been killed. You understand
Piers,
that, do you?
do you understand that you don't care about my
Answer-
children
don't
and
keep
other
asking
Israeli
me
children
questions.
by letting 7th of October happen again and again?
Oh, I do. Oh, I do. Oh, I do. In fact, to my detriment, actually, in the Middle East for many, many months, when I was defending Israel's right to defend itself. But now we're at a point where more and more civilians are getting killed in collateral damage as you wage a war and a strategy and a plan which makes no sense to even your own former prime ministers who think you're committing war crimes. So don't just couch all this as propaganda by people who just... Well, okay, but again, I simply ask you one more time. Why is it you know how many Hamas terrorists you've killed, but you don't know how many children you've killed?
All right, folks. So just in case you didn't know this, innocent people don't die in war. Children do not die in war. This is the first time that this has ever happened in the history of warfare, and human beings have been fighting each other since they were just out of the trees and walking upright in the savannas. But only in Israel and in Gaza is deprivation happening to the enemy. What a terrible sin. Michael, what do you say about this? I mean,
I
it's
say
night.
again, why does she answer the question?
Yeah.
One of the first things you learn when you're learning politics, or even when you're getting trained as a CEO, to answer press questions and difficult questions, is somebody asks you a question and you answer it with the answer that you want to talk about, not the answer you want to give. So, and Piers is certainly going to override her anyway. But this is a when did you stop beating your wife question. The answer is I haven't. Well, you're continuing to be, you guys understand. I mean, this is a no-win answer. This basically, the only thing you can say is we are targeting terrorists. We will continue to target terrorists. And we are saddened by all of the civilians. That's why we drop leaflets. That's why we we used to knock on building roofs. That's why we send in Arabic, big discussions when we're going to annihilate a place. We are the only army in the world that does that. It's documented over and over and over again.
And might I say,
she gets into the yeah, but go ahead.
And might I say, you do that to the detriment of your own soldiers and your own
Absolutely,
people.
it is moronic. I've had fights with many Israelis, and I told them you're going to be very righteous and virtuous all the way to your grave.
Yep,
absolutely.
Regretful. I hope the Israeli people see what a terrible, terrible moral stance that is to take.
Yes.
And for their own sake, since you guys are literally in an existential fight for your life, for your lives, I hope you abandon this horrible moral premise as quickly as possible. Marco, what do you think about this IQ dropping series of questions?
Well, again, staggering how stupid a guy can be. As Michael pointed out, this is a question that can only end up in a way, I accepting his premise. He will ask that question at least 7 or 8 times during the whole interview, and she manages not to answer. But again, the answer is we do not target civilians. Yes, we know we have intelligence about the terrorists, the Hamas people, and then we bomb them. Whether they put people in front of it, whether they hide in a school or whatever, it's up to them. And the numbers come from Hamas anyway. So whatever number you quote, it will be from Hamas. So it's a made-up number in the first place. But more importantly, this shows what follow altruism means. Ayn Rand described it perfectly by calling the morality of death. If you go down the route of altruism, where you put somebody else's value in front of your own, when Israel puts the safety of the Palestinian civilians ahead of their own citizens and military personnel, all you get is emboldening Hamas, allowing them to take more hostages for the next time that they do an action like this, and perpetrate this war forever and ever and ever again. And in the end, it will result in the death of Israel itself. You cannot fight a war by not fighting it and hoping that the other side, which is an avowed enemies of life, a bunch of uncivilized people who pretend to be civilized by exploiting what our freedom allows them to have, you cannot deal with them. You cannot sit down at a table and allow them to dictate any term at all. But we go down the route, and in the end, they will win by default.
And this, of course, is an attempt to sever the numbers from the context and from the principles. And he keeps driving this point onto the Israeli ambassador, and she answers this question in about 10 different occasions. And I think across the 10 different occasions, she gets the point across. And I think she does a very good job of keeping her cool under that relentless pressure and accusation, because that's a big part of what is driving Piers Morgan. He wants an emotional response, which she manages to contain sensibly. I think at one point she answers the question by talking about the comparison with the Nazis fighting the British fighting the Nazis, and civilian casualties during that, and he tries to cut her short with that example as quickly as possible by yelling the word whataboutery, which is simply his way of trying to dismiss principle. Because what he wants to keep is a very limited case where he can say, look, Israel is the enemy. And he doesn't want to look at the principle of what do you do when you're fighting evil? What do you do in order to combat evil and win against, a population that is also supporting that evil? Well, you have to do what the British did against the Nazis. You have to do what the US did against the Japanese. And you have to do what Israel is doing in this case here. And of course, at another point, he also points out that Israel is making itself a pariah state, which is the other argument that's used. But nobody seems to say, why aren't Hamas the pariahs? I mean, surely everything that Hamas stand for ought to make them absolute pariahs in the eyes of everybody, both in the region and outside, whether they're wearing a keffiyeh or a dinner jacket at a prestigious, showbiz event. Either way, the Hamas should be seen as the pariahs and there should be no question of that. And the mere fact that there is, and that's transposed across onto Israel, is horrendous to witness.
Well, I'll leave with this Ibsen quote from Enemy of the People. The strongest man in the world is he who stands most alone. This isn't the first time that Israel has had to stand alone against enemies and has been betrayed by its friends in order to fight for its own survival. I don't think ever in history we've had such a morally unclear world to deal with, but hopefully some of these messages, these smoke signals that we're giving out there, can be a signpost for people in Israel as to the proper way in which they should defend their lives. They should defend their lives as if they matter more than the Palestinians' lives, because they do in this situation. That's simply the way values work. I would go on to say something very controversial. I won't say it now because it would start a whole conversation. So I'm just going to conclude with some announcements. 8 p.m. UK time, a principled analysis of the U.S. Constitution with James Valiant for Reardon Medal members and above. Also live streamed to YouTube Inner Circle members. So be sure to watch that. James Valiant is a great guy. Constant guest on our show, The Capitalist Corner, which competes with the show before this, but still, it's a fun show, and he's a great guest to have on. He's also sort of our legal advisor for the American Capitalist Party, so kudos to him for choosing the right group to hang with. I want to thank you guys for all your help here in getting out the right message and countering idiots like Piers Morgan, and in hopefully fortifying the Israeli people in the fight that they have ahead. Because the world is trying to demoralize you guys, Michael, and we will not allow it. Just know that there are people in America and people in the UK who are not stupid, who actually have a moral compass, and we will win because we have reason on our side. So, folks, that's the reality show for today. Make sure you watch that stuff coming up at 8 p.m. UK time. Thanks, guys, for being here, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.
Thanks. Bye-bye.